Paranoid and delusional. In Spare, Prince Harry does an amazing job of revealing what his mental state is really like while believing he's doing something different. Hello everyone, welcome back to the King YouTube channel. As most of you probably already know, the last few weeks have been absolutely filled with news about Omid Scobie's new book Endgame, how it trashes the royals even more than Harry did in his book Spare. Meanwhile, Harry and Meghan seem to be laying low. They are bizarrely quiet about the whole situation. They have not spoken out in defense of their cheerleader, and they also have not spoken out to condemn the book. At this point, of course, we have no idea when they're going to break their silence and if they're going to address the book at all. Ever since Endgame came out, we've only seen Meghan orchestrate a single pap walk, which is very unusual for her. So we're just going to have to take a wait-and-see approach when it comes to what Meghan and Harry are going to do next. In the absence of real news to share about the Montecito malcontents, I thought today I would do a deep dive into Harry's mental state as portrayed in Spare. Now, Spare is something we have talked about plenty before, but in this video, I want to share with you some insights into Harry's mental state that we haven't necessarily talked about before. I also want to discuss with you how Harry thought he was portraying himself in Spare, but didn't quite pull it off. First of all, let's talk just a little bit about the ghostwriter working with Harry on the book, Jr Minger. Jr Minger actually lived in Montecito in Meghan and Harry's guest house while he was working with Harry on the book. And from what he has revealed in interviews, it was not an easy process helping Harry to write this tome. So one thing that Jr Minger has talked about is how he was fighting with Harry for plausibility. It sounds like Harry wanted to include stories that simply were not believable, and Jr Minger was not going to go along with that. And really, this reminds me of what the Spotify executive said too, that Harry had these ideas about interviewing Trump and Putin about their childhood traumas. It sounds like Harry is simply not able to understand objective reality. He is so caught up in his own experience of everything that he can't really see reality for what it is. It sounds like a lot of the stuff that Jr Minger disagreed with Harry on had to do with his military training and his military experience. In an interview with Harper's Bazaar, Minger recalled a late-night Zoom session with Harry to go over some edits in the book, and apparently the two men were at loggerheads over a specific part of the book. Harry was in the middle of a brutal military training that simulates the experience of being kidnapped and tortured by terrorists. So he was starved, he was beaten, he was stripped, and at one point the fake captors even insulted him. And they insulted him by making what he referred to as a vile dig at his late mother, Princess Diana. And Harry insisted that this portion of the book end with some witty comeback that he had said to the captor. But Minger said that wasn't such a great idea. Minger said, quote, "Although this wasn't the first time that Harry and I had argued, it felt different. It felt as if we were hurtling towards some kind of decisive rupture, in part because Harry was no longer saying anything. He was just glaring into the camera. Finally, he exhaled and calmly explained that all his life people had belittled his intellectual capabilities, and this flash of cleverness proved that even after being kicked and punched and deprived of sleep and food, he had his wits about him." So in the end, Minger ended up winning this argument, and that portion of the book was edited out. But it really says a lot as to how Harry perceives himself and how he wants other people to perceive him. And honestly, folks, it's pitiful. I mean, Harry is not that smart, and that's something apparently that has bothered him his entire life. Some people have speculated that maybe he has ADHD, but we do know he himself has admitted that he's not much of a reader, that reading was always hard for him. School was really hard for him too. And he had to watch his older brother, Prince William, excel at basically everything. Charles is also an intellectual. He is a thinker. And I suspect this is part of why Harry has always felt like he was excluded from his family. He simply couldn't match them in intelligence, and that's something he knew. But at the same time, I do not believe this is any excuse for Harry's behavior lately. I mean, I don't believe for 1 second that his father or his brother treated him badly just because he wasn't very intelligent. I think the king still showed so much love to his son. And as for William, okay, maybe he made fun of Harry a few times for not being all that bright, but that's normal brother stuff. I don't think William saw him as any less than himself just because maybe his IQ wasn't very high. If anything, I suspect that made William want to protect him even more. It also sounds like Harry is just so hung up on these perceived slights. He is so hung up on stuff that has happened to him in the past, the ways that he feels like he's been treated unfairly. Moringer also said, while I always emphasize storytelling in scenes, Harry couldn't escape the wish that Spare might be a rebuttal to every lie ever published about him. He knew, of course, that some people would be aghast at first. Why on earth would Harry talk about that? But he had faith that they would soon see, because someone else already talked about it and got it wrong. It is interesting, isn't it, how the rest of the family just puts up with the stuff that's written about them in the media. They know that the best way to react to those stories is to not react at all, to just let them go away, but Harry can't do that. He simply cannot let bygones be bygones. He's always got to get the last word in. And that's why we see him and Meghan right now continuing with their relentless attacks against King Charles and Prince William and the rest of the royal family. Even though the only people they are hurting are themselves, they simply cannot give it up. Another thing Harry also accidentally reveals about himself is that he can never take accountability for his actions. When he talks about breaking up with Chelsea, he claims that he was just a soldier going off to war. Of course, they couldn't stay together. And he didn't see that it was going to work long term, but he didn't seem to really communicate that clearly with her. But he's not going to take responsibility for his role in that. Instead, he's just going to gloss over it and act like, oh, it was just a natural progression of things. It wasn't. He hurt her badly, but he can't accept that. He's not going to admit it. And then basically the same with Cressida. I mean, they were dating for 2 years. About Chelsea, Harry even said that unlike other girls, she doesn't fit herself with a crown upon meeting him. But he still, for whatever reason, claimed that he just couldn't see it working long term. Well, why? I mean, there was nothing wrong with her, but there was something wrong with Harry. He basically does the same thing with Cressida in the book and their breakup. They were dating for 2 years. He was turning 30 years old. The appropriate thing to do would have been to ask Cressida to marry him. But that's not what happened. Harry was on a trip trekking to the North Pole, and at that time, he all of a sudden had this epiphany that she was not the right girl for him. So she cried, and he just glosses over the whole breakup as being mutual, but it wasn't. And a friend had to step in and tell him it was time to end things. And then you remember those infamous Las Vegas photos of Harry partying without any clothes on. Well, according to some reports, he also hooked up with 2 separate women. And guess what? He was with Cressida the whole time. But does he mention that? Does he admit that in Spare? Absolutely not, because he's not going to admit the truth when it doesn't make him look good. There was also the disgusting story that Harry shared in Spare, I still don't understand why, of how he and his friends used to mock and make fun of a disabled matron at their school. I guess he thought that he was going to sound cute and charming and funny, but he didn't. He just sounded like a disgusting misogynist, talking about how Pat didn't make us horny because she was short and unattractive. Not much of a thing, always with a tired face and greasy hair, he wrote. She had a deviated spine, and her knees were so stiff that she had to walk down the stairs backwards. Now, Harry claims to be so sensitive, so you would think that he would feel sorry for her, that he would feel some empathy towards her, but no, he just made fun of her for it. He wrote that they would do these mocking little dances and make faces at her discomfort. So basically, he humiliated her thoroughly, and has no shame about it, even as a grown man. The inclusion of that story just shows how out of touch with reality Harry really is. He doesn't understand how people perceive him. He has this wish that people are going to view him as being the funny guy, being the charming one of the family, being kind of a bad boy sometimes, but a lovable bad boy. But that's not how he comes across. Instead, he comes across as a petulant brat, very immature, very mean, and a misogynist as well. I'm baffled that Harry thought that readers were going to laugh along with this story just like his friends did. Nobody finds that funny. And as a grown man, he should be feeling remorse for his actions, but clearly he doesn't. All of us, when we were children, did some shameful things. I think, that's how we learn. But the strange thing about Harry is that it doesn't seem like he ever learns from any of his mistakes, any of his past misdeeds. Instead, he just keeps on plowing ahead, expecting everybody to understand him on his terms. But the thing is, we can't, because he lives in a different world, a fantasy world, a world where he is the victim and everybody else is the perpetrator. Harry also included a story in Spare about his history teacher trying to help him. So he claimed that his history teacher was so frustrated because he wasn't interested in learning about his own historical relatives, so the teacher gave him a ruler with photos and dates on it to help him remember. So Harry thought that this was just a slap in the face. He found it so offensive instead of seeing that this history teacher was just trying to help him. In telling this story, Harry really just makes it clear that what he lacks in intelligence, he makes up for in arrogance. Another thing Harry talks about at length in Spare is the way he feels about his father Charles. I mean, according to Harry, Charles has completely failed as a parent. He didn't give him the love that he really needed. But what Harry really shows is that Charles gave him the love the best way he knew how, both consistently and gently. So the way that Charles informed Harry about Diana's death was in a quiet, personal way. It was one-on-one. Charles is a private man. Harry expected some big show, I guess, but that's just not who Charles is. But Charles was there for Harry. He would show up to every single school play that Harry was in to support him. It didn't matter how small the role was. But Harry found that embarrassing. And even when Harry had all that trouble in Las Vegas and was dressing up like a Nazi, Charles was there for him. He was sympathetic. He didn't get angry at Harry. He didn't chastise him. Instead, he was just there to support him and to listen to him. But that's not good enough for Harry. This also really helps us to understand why Charles reacts the way that he does towards Harry's attacks. Charles knows his son perhaps better than anybody does, except maybe William. Charles knows that his son has some problems. He knows that his mental health is not good, and that's why I think at this point he can't find it in him to even get angry at Harry. I think more than anything, he pities him. But at the same time, I do still believe it would be entirely appropriate for King Charles to remove the titles of Duke and Duchess from Harry and Meghan, because those titles are so much more than a family issue. Those titles have to do with the nation. And right now, Harry and Meghan are not representing Britain and the Commonwealth. They have no business holding on to those titles. So I do hope Charles makes the right decision in this, even if it is going to hurt his wayward son. Harry's relationship with his family members, especially William and Charles, are very complicated, and that much comes across in Spare. Clearly, Harry has some severe abandonment issues, and that partially explains why he was such easy prey for Meghan Markle. When he talks about Camilla and Charles getting married, when he talks about William and Catherine getting married, he talks about it in such a way that he believes that people are being taken away from him. It's another goodbye that he has to deal with. I mean, marriage is a very natural development in one's life for most people, but for people with arrested development like Harry, it can be seen as an offense. Harry couldn't really be happy for his father or his brother because he could only think about them in relation to himself. He has never really seen them as independent men who have a right to their own happiness. It's all about him. Spare also makes it really clear exactly what Harry's problem with his older brother is. William dared to grow up and leave him behind. That right there is the core issue that Harry has. He's never going to forgive his brother for growing up and having a family of his own. After their mother passed away, the bond between William and Harry was amazing. It was so strong. And that's something that Harry thought was going to last forever. He thought that forever it was going to be them against the world. Well, I mean, William grew up and things changed, and Harry just found that too difficult to accept, too hurtful, even though it had nothing to do with him. It had everything to do with William growing up and becoming a man. Harry is also really defensive about his mental health struggles and his intelligence. Harry's grip on reality is tenuous at best, and it sounds like this is a topic that has been discussed many times between Charles and William and Harry himself. Harry doesn't like to have his view of reality challenged, but it's something that needs to be done. William and Charles were just trying to help him. They were trying to show him love by letting him know that maybe his perception wasn't always fitting with reality. There is a classic passage in Spare that really illustrates this. Harry wrote, "Meg was apparently a bully. That was the latest vicious campaign that helped orchestrate. It was so shocking, so egregious, that even after Meg and I demolished their lie with a 25-page, evidence-filled report to Human Resources, I was going to have trouble simply shrugging that one off." Pa stepped back. Willie shook his head. They began talking over each other. "We've been down this road 100 times, they said. You're delusional, Harry. But they were the delusional ones." I mean, that right there really shows us how disturbed Harry is. I mean, they've been down this road 100 times. Most people do not have that experience. I certainly have not been told 100 times that I am delusional. And this is something that has come up in interviews too. Harry accuses his father and brother of saying that he's paranoid and delusional. Well, Harry, we can see exactly why. So what's wrong with you that you can't? And you, what do you think of Harry's mental state? Please let me know your opinion below in the comments section. If you enjoyed this video today, don't hesitate to like and share it with anybody else who would appreciate it too. And don't be afraid to click the subscribe button to get more updates in the future. Thank you so much for tuning in, have a lovely weekend, and we'll be back to see you all tomorrow.